Hi, I'm Cindy Schwartz, one of the co-founders of Attentive Teaching. Welcome to our second conversation about critical race theory. Today, we expand the conversation to include First Amendment rights and the proposed Florida state law, the Parental Rights Bill, that is recently and has been recently passed by their legislation and is set to be signed by Governor DeSantis. We'll see how all of these are intimately connected to the C.R.T. controversy. We have our Attentive Teaching team with us today, our co-founders. Please raise your hand. Lori Bellan and Roxee Lore, and our board member, Carol Vogt. And we have teacher mentor, Karen Bracco, as well as the voice of the future, our psychology student and social media specialist, Jacob Klein. Well, we'll go around the room very quickly, and we'll have everyone give a one sentence or so introduction to who they are and why they're here, and then we'll dive in. Welcome, everybody. All right, Cordelia, we could start with you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cordelia Anthony. I am a high school science teacher at Farmingdale High School, and I'm the local teacher union president there. Nice to be here.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Perry.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Perry Fuchs. I am also a high school science teacher, and I am also the local president of our teachers union where I work.
Thank you, Perry, for being here as well. Nakia.
Good morning, everyone. Nakia Wolfe. I am a teacher in the Amityville Union Free School District. I teach elementary math intervention services, and I am also the local president for the Amityville Union Free School District.
Wonderful. Wonderful to have all of you. And Johanna.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Johanna Miller. I am the director of the Education Policy Center at the A.C.L.U. of New York.
Thank you, Johanna, for joining us. Roxee?
Okay, so we wanted to start today's session with you, Johanna, because we wanted to focus and expand our discussion on C.R.T. as to the parental rights in education legislation due to become a law in Florida. This is already becoming a template for other states to follow, as we know. And I'm sure we would all be interested to hear what concerns you about the application of this proposed law, and also, if asked, how you would represent teachers in the event that they were brought in front of their boards of education in violation of these laws.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and to talk about this. This bill is part of a nationwide backlash that we're seeing to what has been a recent period of really expanding acknowledgement of the various identities that kids and families bring into a school building and educators bring into the school building. And the backlash, this is not new in American history. This is something we've seen many times before. And if you've been talking about C.R.T., I'm sure you've already talked about this, but a really salient example would be that all of those Confederate monuments that we've been talking about over the past few years that are coming down, most of those were put up after Reconstruction and during the Civil Rights Movement. So they weren't actually contemporaneous monuments, but they were part of a backlash of the expansion of rights as well. So this is a very common kind of pattern or theme that we've seen in American history. That doesn't make it any less scary. I think particularly we're talking about LGBT kids. Mental health issues are very high. Suicide rates are very high for these children. And so putting that extra isolation or pressure on them to become more isolated, even when they may be coming from a family background where they're really not safe and school has been the place where they could be safe, now taking that away is really dangerous and really scary. So I think the scariest thing about it, the thing that worries us the most, is really for the kids and what they're experiencing. Literally, are they going to be safe in schools like this? In the past couple of years, with the huge backlash to teaching diversity and quote unquote C.R.T., which is really a boogeyman that doesn't really exist the way that people think it does. But even in New York, as a result of that, we have seen a humongous uptick in racial discrimination, harassment, and bullying of kids. Things that I've been doing this work for almost 15 years. I actually helped to draft New York State's anti-bullying law, and I have never had so many complaints as I've had in the past maybe 6 to 9 months about racist bullying and discrimination against kids. So that door is open. Then you pass a bill like this in Florida, that door becomes open as well. It's adults normalizing really insidious behavior for kids. Another thing that we're very concerned about is that this bill actually has this language that prohibits quote unquote third parties from teaching or discussing sexual orientation or gender identity. So it's not just educators and it's not just students, but it actually could be counselors. It could be anyone else who comes into the school building, including like a parent volunteer or PTA president who might themselves be a member of the LGBTQ community. They're not even allowed to discuss. And that word discussion, of course, is also really dangerous because it's incredibly vague. So that's a great transition to what I would do if I got a phone call from a teacher about this bill. The First Amendment gives us a lot of tools when we talk about the concept of vagueness. So you can't ban speech in a way that is too vague for anyone to understand what is actually banned, because then you get to a situation where it just depends on what judge is hearing your case about whether your expression is banned or not, or it depends on who's enforcing that law against you. And the First Amendment doesn't allow that. So vagueness is essentially poison, First Amendment poison to a law like this. And I would argue that this law is overly vague in the sense that there is no adequate definition of conduct that is banned. And that it's overbroad. It really is overbroad to the point that, like, if a child raises their hand and asks a question that isn't part of your lesson plan, are you not allowed to answer it? Are you not allowed to even acknowledge them? That is considered vagueness and overbreadth in the First Amendment context. And I think that's what would make this law subject to a legal challenge.
Johanna, I wanted to bounce off of what you were saying earlier in terms of access to counselors and schools being like a safe place for kids. There's lines 67 through 78 of the law. I'll just like read a blurb of it, but it's essentially talking about the required notification of parents if the kid seeks help in school. In accordance with the rights of parents, adopt procedures for notifying a student's parent if there is a change in the student's services or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being and the school's ability to provide a safe and supportive learning environment for the student. The procedures must reinforce the fundamental right of parents to make decisions regarding the upbringing and control of their children by requiring the school district personnel to encourage a student to discuss issues relating to his or her well-being with his or her parent, or to facilitate discussion of the issue with the parent. So if the child is in a hostile situation at home, it's basically giving the kid no place to go, and it provides backlash for the student if they do try to seek help within the institution, because there's no way they're not going to get backlash from their parent if that's what they came to them for.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the opposite of what the research tells us about marginalized kids, and particularly kids who are coming out or thinking about coming out, or even just having questions and ideas about their sexuality, that if they're in an abusive situation and they seek an adult, everything tells us having an adult that reflects their experience in the school, having an adult they can see, that identification where you see someone who has been through an experience that you're going through, goes so far to keeping those kids safe. And then even just having an adult, a trusted adult in the school in general, really big picture, the research on school safety, on school, even just at the level of like disruption, goes down as kids start to feel like one adult in the building at least knows me and knows what I'm going through. So the more that you start to sever that lifeline, it has ripple effects across everything, literally to the level of like classroom management, all the way up to those kids, and a huge proportion of LGBT youth are runaways, a giant, percentage of homeless youth in New York and elsewhere are gay kids who have nowhere to go, like you said. So anything that severs that lifeline is really going in the wrong direction. And actually, it's very different. This is an example of a way that I think New York is actually kind of moving more in the right direction, because a lot of school districts actually have policies that require them to keep that information confidential if a kid is seeking, any kind of like advice or help in school. Obviously, if you're a licensed social worker or psychologist, you have your own set of ethical rules that prohibits you from discussing that with the parent. But in New York, we even have laws that allow young people to make healthcare decisions without permission from their parent. They can get treatment for all sorts of things, including sexual health and reproductive health treatment, without permission from their parent. And this is exactly why, because it would not be available to many young people because of their circumstances. So in New York, we actually have laws that kind of pull us in the other direction from what Florida is. We have some work to do, but at least we're on the sort of moving to the other side of this issue. But it's a really good point.
Yeah, I wonder from the teachers that we have here, because I'm retired, so I'm not in school anymore. Which way what are you seeing? Are you seeing any of this going on? Cordelia or Perry or any of you?
I mean, it's hard to tell at the elementary level. I believe this law in Florida is geared towards younger children. I believe, right? Is geared more towards
it's K through 3, but
right.
But it does say that above 3rd grade, that you cannot it has to be age appropriate. And as Johanna said, it's very vague. Developmentally and age appropriate as to what kind of conversation you can have as an educator with a child about LGBTQ issues. So what is age appropriate? It's immensely vague. Yeah, go ahead, Perry.
So I would agree with Johanna that in New York, we definitely seem to be moving in the opposite direction, at least in the school district where I work. The children are certainly given the rights to express themselves and however they feel is appropriate, and conversations are encouraged. We have a very prominent LGBTQ club in the high school with lots of members, and they do lots of activities, and they're well received by the community, and they're well received by the parents and the kids and the students. So I couldn't agree more that in New York, we seem to be moving in the opposite direction as Florida is moving.
I have to agree as well. I think I work in a high school also, but I know in my district, there's a GSA club in both the middle school and the high school. We had students as early as elementary, realizing they weren't in the right bodies and asking to go to different bathrooms. Like this is things that have been happening for a while. And I'm sure it wasn't comfortable for everyone initially, but they're children, that they're what we're there to do, and we're there to help. And of course, it's so weird, as we mentioned, the terminology of this bill, because of course, parents are vital as a part of all of the stakeholders involved in serving these students. But when they express something, we have to listen to them, because as Johanna said, when they're not listened to and bullying is not stopped in that group of people, they tend to have a higher suicide rate. And we've seen it, in schools all over the country. So I think it's unfortunate what's starting there in Florida will stifle, kids from starting to not, I hate using the word tolerant, but to start to understand that there are kids in their age group that don't feel the same as they do. Because, when you start school is when you start seeing most of those gender differences. And when you can't express that because you're not going to be allowed to, or conversation is not going to be allowed to happen, it's going to be problematic for them.
And I think what's scary is that this seems to be like a broader assault on mental health as well. It is part of the bill. I'm not going to read through the lines here, 106 through 118, but it essentially gives the parents the right to prohibit, like literally opt out their kids from being able to see like health or counseling services, which is pretty mortifying, to say the least, that a child in a crisis is literally being taken health resources away from them in their one place of refuge, right? So I think this is also just a larger kind of an attempt of this like wave of bigotry to associate like things like LGBTQ issues with mental health, and then to just it's not like they want to provide these issues either. So it's also an avenue for them to defund a lot of these counseling services that they do have in these schools as well.
Yeah, I think what's most concerning, especially when you're talking about on the elementary level, where it is at that stage where many of students start to have a realization as to the fact that they're feeling different, and to rob them of that actual experience of being able to have somebody who they can speak to, I think speaks to a bigger problem. That problem's similar to all of the voter rights suppression bills that are going on, bringing politics into the educational system, where it is that that will give people the opportunity to learn a la carte, right? So yes, you can learn this, but no, you can't learn that. If I'm not comfortable with this, then we can't do that. Yes, I can, advocate for bullying programs to be there for my students, but I don't want anybody to talk about being gay because it's not age appropriate. I think that we're coming into dangerous territory because, like Florida being the first, once you start to have other states that follow suit, it goes back to what it is that we discussed last time, which is the deconstruction of the public education system, and what that's going to look like. Is it going to be a reflection of whatever politics, whatever political argument is at play at the moment, or are we really supposed to be in the business of educating kids from a wide view, making sure that we have that same diversity that America is touted for, which has been excluded from our educational history, at least in our generations, and even that of the kids who are in school right now. So that is really what is the most concerning, as far as I feel.
It also going off of what you said. It's not just political, but I imagine that there's a religious undercurrent to it as well, where this is not a choice. Sexuality is sometimes something that you're born with, that, if a child doesn't feel like they're in the wrong, feels like they're in the wrong body, or if they feel attracted to, one sex more than the other, or they're starting to have that, that noticing, that's not a choice. And what this bill kind of assumes is that, I don't know, it seems to be like if we don't talk about it, we can kind of pray it away. I don't know. But that's what worries me too, that it doesn't acknowledge that, for a lot of children, this is something that they're starting to recognize about themselves, and they have not chosen it. They're just realizing that this is who they are, and that if we don't talk about it, then you won't know about it and you won't be it. It's, that's troubling. And what message are you sending to anybody in that respect?
Right, and the suppression of these identities it does just create the mental health issues that they want to suppress in the first place, right? And so, like, if we just openly deal with these issues of expression, it's very simple. That I'm not a childhood educator that teaches about LGBTQ issues, but the curriculum's out there, and it's not as risque as people constantly make it out to be. I remember when I was in 6th grade, I was forced to go to a night where each parent and their kid, there was a boys' night and there was a girls' night, and everybody came to school at like 8 o'clock at night, and they watched like a health screening video or whatever on genitalia or whatever. And so, like, if we're able to do that, I think then we can talk about homosexual romance in a way that isn't risque and pornographic like religious conservatives would make it out to be. And it's scary because this is part of their kind of broader mission to, like you were saying earlier, to tear apart our public education system. Because another part of the bill is that if a parent sues for, let's say there's like a teacher that offhandedly mentions that one of the books that like was really popular in the school was written by a gay author, and then the parent is like, how dare you idolize that gay author, and so I'm going to sue the school. The school has to then pay for the lawyer fees of the prosecution against the school. And so this is another way to just hemorrhage school budgets in every way possible, so that they have no, money for supplies to pay for teachers, and then it leads to charter schools everywhere, and that's where a lot of the curriculum is completely controlled by religious fanatics and the other like.
Johanna, I'm wondering, does the A.C.L.U, I mean, not just necessarily in New York, but just nationwide, what has been the A.C.L.U's experience or sort of history with the issue of parental rights and schools? How are they, from what legal, whatever stance are they going to, constitutional kind of stance are they going to be able to use to, to try to deal with the issues that people have been raising here?
This is a great question. So legally, the legal concept, when you send your kids to school, the courts have recognized that the school is standing, and this is Latin, so excuse me, but in loco parentis, right? So the school is standing in for the parent when you send your child to school. And the Supreme Court has recognized some exceptions to that. There's been some good cases and some bad cases throughout history, but in general, it's the courts are very deferential to educators. Judges very rarely will substitute their own judgment for that of an educator in making a decision about a school. So it's very rare that there's a circumstance where a parent can challenge a decision that's made in the regular course of education by an educator, a judgment call or a decision where you have some discretion, that a judge would say, I'm going to substitute my discretion for yours. That's extremely rare. So the concept of like parental rights, it sounds great. They love it, but actually it's pretty diminished in this space. And actually the interesting thing is that the polling on this is not really great. Most parents support schools teaching topics that they don't want to talk about at home. So sex ed, for example, is a really good example. Sex ed polls so high across the country, conservative places, liberal places, and that's comprehensive sex education that includes discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity. Parents overwhelmingly want schools to teach sex ed because they don't want to have to do it at home. The idea that parents are offended and upset because their kid learned something in schools actually represents a very, very small minority of parents. And actually, I want to pick up on something that you were saying earlier about the concept of public education. The Supreme Court in a case last year actually wrote that public schools are the nurseries of democracy. And it's a great quote to keep in mind as we have these conversations, because how do you prepare a generation of people to participate in a democracy and live in a pluralist society without an education that reflects any type of diversity at all, where they're not, meeting adults or other kids who have a different life than them. So public education is so essential for that reason. And the Supreme Court, at least last year's Supreme Court, recognized that in a case that was actually a case of free speech case, a student free speech case, where a student was suspended for posting something on her Snapchat. You might have heard discussion of that case, but the Supreme Court overturned the suspension and said, public schools are the nurseries of democracy. We can't teach democracy if we are able to reach into students' private lives and tell them you can get in trouble in school for anything you do on your private time. So it's a little bit different subject, but conceptually, I think a really important one. And so, yeah, I think that idea of parental rights is something that's really being exploited. In New York, for example, there have been a lot of proposals put forward to have parents be able to opt out of in particular sex ed. Sex ed happens to be an area of expertise for me, so that's why I keep bringing it up. But I think it's very relevant that where parents could opt out of sex ed, and the state education department is please no. That's not pedagogically sound to have some kids learning lessons about their bodies and consent and healthy relationships and how to stay healthy, and some kids not. But B, just administratively, we are not going to create a two-tiered system where every school has to decide what room every kid can go in for every lesson. That is just a very slippery slope and a nightmare for educators. So state education department in New York has really resisted those types of opt-outs, and we hope that they'll toe the line on that in the future as well.
The only thing that I've seen, I'm sorry, Carol, the only thing that I've seen an opt-out for in my career was in the city, we had the AIDS curriculum from K to 12, and parents had the, and every grade was completely grade appropriate, where, transmission and anything like that was concerned. But you would send a letter home the week before, let parents know that this was the curriculum that was going to be taught for the week. These were the lessons that were going to be presented, and the parents had the opportunity to opt out of any of the lessons. Having taught from 1 to 5, I don't think I ever got an opt-out letter from a parent for any of the lessons in the AIDS curriculum. And that's the only one that I can think of where parents were actually ever given the chance to opt out, and by and large, they didn't.
And the HIV/AIDS curriculum is a great example, actually, where educators really pushed to do a better job than the larger public, and particularly elected officials, wanted us to do in New York. I mean, it was very controversial at the time. Now it's required by state law that you teach HIV. That 20, 30 years ago was a huge controversy. So, and it was really educators who moved us forward on that.
I'm thinking about a constitutional challenge that would come up where the A.C.L.U. would be protecting the right, the mission of the school. What if, I can see this in front of, the current Supreme Court. What if a lawyer from Florida was to say, relating to the part of the bill that says that if a child goes to a counselor and talks about their sexuality and that the parent needs to be informed, okay? What if a child went to a counselor and said, I'm really interested in the Proud Boys and Nazism, and I am going to join that group, okay? And therefore the parent wants to know about that because that is a dangerous thing, and certainly not anything that a parent might want a child to do. What kind of response would an A.C.L.U. have? Where does that, because that's what's going to happen. That's where it's going to go to. I mean, I can see the Florida lawyers taking that position. Well, okay, you don't want us to, you think parents should be informed about some things, but what about other things? You know what I mean? I'm really concerned about, I no longer have the sense like this can't happen here. I believe this can happen here.
So it's happening now.
And I love the A.C.L.U. I love the A.C.L.U. I see the A.C.L.U. as somebody who can help me figure out how this will be dealt with and how these people won't win.
Yeah. Well, to sort of answer your question, I'll just say this. I'm not an expert on Florida law, but this is what I know from preparing for this call and the other things that are going on in the A.C.L.U. This Florida law is coming at a time when Florida lawmakers are revising their state school counseling standards. And the school counseling standards in Florida for at least 10 years have explicitly acknowledged sexual orientation diversity and gender identity diversity, and have informed counselors that how to relate to kids in those situations in a way that is supportive. And so this bill is actually just in some ways like it's like the tip of the iceberg, because they will be revising the school counseling standards. And we think that they're going to try to go after some of that language there. Now, if I was in Florida, what I would be trying to do is working with the School Counselors Association on those standards, because those standards include confidentiality provisions. And this is where it comes back to your question. the confidentiality provisions are essential to the ethical standards of any type of counseling, school psychologist, anything like that. And that would extend to anything you talk about in therapy, with the exception of, and this is standard across states and pretty much everywhere, if they think that you are going to hurt yourself or hurt someone else. So in that sense, I think if they were expressing, if a child was just saying, I'm curious about these questions and these issues, I'd like to learn more about being a Nazi, probably would not be able to breach confidentiality. But if the child is expressing ideation that is violent, then absolutely, that's when you could break that confidentiality and still be within your ethical boundaries. So I think we're going to be looking towards certified and licensed counselors and psychologists to really stand strong on their standards for their profession. And I think that they will. And those standards have been upheld across professions. Obviously, lawyers have similar standards, and those are going to be really important. The courts are not going to go after those standards. So I think if the counselors say, no, absolutely not, I can't share any of this information, they probably will win on that argument.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
I think it puts them in a precarious position because, I mean, I think so many jobs are going to be on the line when we're talking about these kinds of discussions about systemic racism and sexism and white privilege and male privilege and all of this, and having these discussions in the classroom among teachers. I mean, I think everyone's going to be afraid to talk about anything. I mean, the fear in these states is going to be just incredible, and people are going to be afraid that they're going to get turned in, that each person is going to turn the other person in. Do you know what I mean? No one's going to have trust, and no one's going to be able to feel comfortable talking about anything, because you're not going to know, who's who and what's what, and how are we going to navigate this? I mean, we're lucky in New York State that this is not occurring, but it is occurring very quickly across our country, and it seems that there's only a small amount, like around 19 states that are not getting involved in this. The rest of them are to some degree. And that is scary, especially with an election looming ahead in 2 years, which is nothing. Okay. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they've done some really insidious things with this law. And also we saw a similar structure in the Texas abortion ban, where they create enforcement mechanisms that are really problematic. So you mentioned before that the school has to foot the bill if somebody sues them. In Texas, they sort of deputized anyone to call in a report and personally to sue someone else for having an abortion because it harms them. It's a level of person against person that we haven't seen before, even in legislation like this. And of course, here's the irony. Florida doesn't have that many school counselors. They're one of the worst states in the country. They don't even have school counselors. So to your point that school counselors are going to lose their jobs, they absolutely are looking for ways to cut school counselors. The national standard ratio for counselors to students, the recommended ratio is 250 to 1, and Florida's is something like 500 to 1. They're literally one of the worst states when it comes to that ratio. So they already don't have any counselors, and now they're making it harder to be a counselor, and now people are going to be coming after their counselors. So there's no level of this that I would say is a conspiracy theory. They are going after counseling as a concept. They are trying to remove funding from schools for these kind of services. That's 100%. And that at the end of the line is the dismantling of public education conceptually. I mean, that's definitely the goal. It has been an expressed goal for many years, and they're coming after it with every tool that they have. So I think it's all part of the same. It's all part of the same goal. And if they tried it in a state where they actually had a lot of counselors, they would have bigger opposition. They'd have counselors opposing this, professionals. But in Florida, they have so few that it's much easier for them to get away with this.
Yeah. And you'd also have the unions, the states with very strong teachers unions opposing it as well. Not just the people who are counselors, I assure you.
Mm-hmm. I've just been thinking about how dangerous a lot of this is overall. I mean, Johanna, you touched on something that I was going to bring up. We're coming to a point in time where it is that I spoke about that pendulum of progress, of how it is that in a lot of ways, as the country is moving forward, and then as we come backwards, we want to make sure we don't go too far back, or we don't start where it is that we were before. We have a new past, a new point of origin. I look at this a lot as almost regionalized or state segregation of education, right? Because think about all of the different places where it is that laws like this would be enacted and put in place. What is it that students are going to be learning in the future? We're going to be forming a society where it is that choice, as you know, you have no choice in terms of what it is that you could do to your body. You have no choice in terms of what it is that you can learn. Over here, you're going to learn this. Over here, that you're going to learn that. And so, from a political standpoint, if you're able to basically frame the belief systems of what it is that people are going to of how people are going to be as they grow up and as they get educated, you're now creating a society that continues the trend that we're going on, which is that of divisiveness. These are all tools that not just are going to impact the educational system. That's going to be the most devastating piece, because as we know, we educate our youth so that they can be productive members of society. So that we can, the attack is almost kind of like on, rational democracy or rational thinking for, the democratic process. So all of those things are being attacked, starting in the public schools, as we're talking about, but how that filters out into society as a whole, and what are we looking at if there isn't a fight against all of these different pieces that are happening? Because if you're thinking about all of these things in isolation, it sounds like the past to me.
It is. It's Germany in the 1930s. The same tactics.
And to make sure that the enemy is a professional. This distrust of the professions and of people who has spent many years becoming experts in their field. That's the enemy. That's who you want to go after. The scientist, the doctor, the teacher, the principal. There's a big movement, and this is right in our backyard in New York. I'm sure you've seen this, for people to run for school board and sort of take the school boards and move them in this more restrictive direction. And a lot of the rhetoric around that is like, take it back from people who think they know what they're doing. You know what you're doing. You know what's best. And to some degree, sure, anyone can run for school board, but you do have to know that there are federal laws that you're now responsible for enforcing. You can't just say, I don't like them. If you're on the school board, you have to enforce Title IX. You have to enforce Title VI. You have to enforce anti-discrimination laws. And there's this huge disdain for that, for any type of expertise or professional background that's part of the narrative here.
Johanna, maybe I could ask you this question too. There's another law in Florida. It's not just the parental rights law. There's this Stop the Wrongs to Our Kids and Employees Act, which has been given the name of the W.O.K.E. Act. And that says that a teacher cannot teach any concept at all that could make a student feel guilt or anguish because of their race or sex. So of course, as a history teacher myself, I wanted to ask you this. How are teachers protected by an organization like the A.C.L.U? If I'm teaching, how do I teach the Civil War and Reconstruction and the poll taxes and the literacy tests and Jim Crow laws and all of that without, I'm not imposing upon a white person to feel guilt about that, but I'm going to teach that it was initiated, these laws, by white folks and white politicians. How do I teach without the fear of being fired or losing my tenure? Do I have a First Amendment right that supersedes a law like this Florida law? That's what I'm asking you. How are we protected teachers?
These laws are in litigation right now in some other states. I know people are challenging them in other states. The challenge that we have in this area is there is no Supreme Court precedent that establishes a right of academic freedom in the K-12 context. So there's very strong academic freedom law at the secondary, post-secondary context. So college professors have a lot of protections, but in the K-12 context, there's actually not a legal recognition of an academic freedom right on part of educators. It's an area where lawyers like myself have wanted to develop the law, meaning we're looking for test cases to get judges to create that right. And these laws that are being passed, unfortunately, are not presenting very good test cases because they're happening in states where we don't have very good judges. So it's really hard to get it there. The closest thing we have is actually a New York case called Island Trees v. Pico. So for those of you in Long Island, you know the Island Trees School District.
Yes, yes, yes.
So this case is actually an A.C.L.U. of New York case, and where the Supreme Court said the school board can't censor books out of the school library, can't remove books solely on the basis that they disagree with their content. So it sounds great, but it's also really hard to interpret. Like, what does that mean? Like, okay, if it can't be because you disagree with the content, that implies that there is some way that you can make those decisions. And the court actually grapples with this. If you read the decision, they're like, but the school board does have to choose which books to buy. Like, they don't have an infinite budget. They can't buy every book in the world. So how do they choose? And it can't be based on their orthodoxy or their belief system. So it's a little bit of a precarious precedent, to be honest. And we are seeing a lot of book bans in New York, even like all over the place, books being removed from school shelves. And it's honestly legally a little bit of a gray area what the school districts can do. Now, it's very clear they can't just pull a book because they think this book talks about gay people and we don't believe in that. That is the one thing that the Island Trees case tells us. But beyond that, it's very muddy, and it's really hard to know exactly how that case would be interpreted now and what a judge would decide about it, and how we could use that case and that precedent to move forward and expand the idea of academic freedom for K-12 educators.
So I want to be clear. Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
I'm just curious how that impacts what's it's happening across the country, like in Texas, right? Where they just banned, they came down to 3 books that are totally banned, but they were, ready to ban like a whole bunch that had anything to do with, LGBTQ, especially transgender. Like, that seems to be like a very big buzzword right now for this, this movement, in terms of really going after transgender and, Black and Indigenous people of color. All of this seems to be the focus. Is that what you were going to talk about, Cindy?
Well, I was going to bring that up as well, but I just want to make it clear to those who are listening then that, Johanna, what you're saying is that an educator who teaches in a K through 12 setting is currently not really protected from these laws.
I think I would say they're less protected than a college level professor, but not that they're not protected at all, but it's not clear exactly how far that protection would extend. Now, you're protected by a lot of other things, particularly in New York, right? You have a union contract, you have tenure. We are a state where educators are somewhat better positioned.
We're also indemnified too in New York State.
Exactly.
By the district. So that makes a big difference.
Yes, that's huge. So we're in a slightly better position, but certainly teachers in other states, you went right to the heart of the issue. Like, there actually is no way to teach your lesson without feeling like you might get fired. That's the point. The point of the overbreadth and the vagueness written into these statutes is you won't be able to use your judgment to decide what's safe and what's not, that you just won't teach it at all. And how you teach any history at all in that circumstance is completely impossible, and that's by design.
Yes, but in New York State, the history curriculum, the period of Reconstruction and Jim Crow laws and the literacy tests and poll tax is in the curriculum. So it seems to me, ultimately, the power is going to be with state legislatures who create the curricula for the state. I mean, because if it's in the curriculum and it's tested on the Regents exam in the American history course, the teacher has to teach it.
Well, Carol, the Florida law states that, of course, the Civil War is taught. Of course, Reconstruction is taught. But it has to be taught in such a way, their law says, that no one feels guilt or anguish. Okay. This is so exactly what Johanna has talked about often tonight is about how that's so vague, and how do we define what a person, what is one person feeling anguish and another person not feeling anguish, so this is incredibly difficult for teachers. And any of the teachers here want to address something?
I mean, I just really quick. History should be. It should be. History should be uncomfortable for sometimes. It is.
Oh, I agree.
We've done bad things.
Exactly.
And you know what? It's uncomfortable, and that's okay. And that's how we learn and grow as a society, to look back and say, "Oh, you know what? This was bad," and that there's nothing wrong with that. I don't understand why we have this drive from parents to say kids should never be made to feel uncomfortable. I don't understand that at all.
Well, this ties in with
what were you going to say?
No, what's disturbing me is uncomfortable for whom? What about the current history that it is that's being taught? I'm sitting here the whole entire time and I'm saying woke and not making individuals feel uncomfortable about what they learn. I'm sorry, but there are some people who have learned their entire lives that the only parts that they've played in the society has either been stereotyped, that they've been enslaved, or they enslaved, or that their existence is a sin, or something, or something to that effect. So I don't understand how it is that you can have a bill, something that is waiting to become eventually, hopefully not, a law that actually states that you can't teach something that is going to make someone feel a certain way. That means we can't teach anything. So we get to teach math, and then that's pretty much it. So I think that makes a teacher's life easy, because if math is all it is, then that's what we just need to be math specialists, because we won't be able to teach anything else at all. We can't teach science. You probably can't teach a different language because somebody might get offended because they don't understand what you're saying. So we're done.
The quadratic formula makes me uncomfortable.
Nakia, even math. I mean, what if a math teacher decides to talk about the contributions of people of color in mathematics that have been disregarded for centuries? Then that might be a problem.
So we will be contracted daycare. We'll just monitor kids while their parents are at work. You can't even educate from that premise alone, because every single time that it is that you're teaching a topic, you never know who it is that's going to have an inverse impact on. And so, what do we do with what we teach now? That's what I'm saying. Like, I just don't.
It goes back to what you said before, Nakia, where you talked about the divisiveness of it. So from one state to another, where you're not worried about offending maybe so much in New York, but you are in other states, now you're rewriting history and you're creating constituents as well. So this is this what the goal is? That there'll be blue states and red states, and blue states will learn things that are different than red states, and we'll be in this perpetual battle over what is actually truth, and us and them mentality all the time.
But I can see, going what you're saying, Karen, like in Florida, I can see some Florida lawyer arguing that isn't the prevention of people feeling anguish the basis of laws against hate speech.
It's just not the same. Like, we have laws for screaming fire in a theater. I know, but like, I'm just saying we shouldn't even give them the ground. Like, I don't. Especially a lot of it with this stuff is just, it's so clear.
It's done. So it's in the past. It's done. We're supposed to learn from it so that we don't repeat it. That's the point of teaching history. You learn so you don't repeat. If in the learning of that you internalize it so badly that you feel guilt over it. I mean, I've taught, like I said, I've taught everything from 1 to 5, and you present the facts. That's it. Where my guilt is, or where your guilt should be in that, we were not a part of that. Our place in learning this is so that we don't bring it forward. Not that we feel guilt over it. We can feel badly over what happened. We can feel guilt over, the treatment of people, or, and the horrible treatment of people. So you can have feeling over that, but why are we internalizing that? Why do I feel, you know what I mean? Why do you feel so guilty over that? It's affecting you. You're to learn from it. You're not, and the feeling that you get from it should be, I would never want this to happen to anyone else again. This was wrong in the context, and I want to learn from it, and I don't want to bring it forward and make it ever happen again. But the idea that it makes people uncomfortable, or we can't teach it because it makes them uncomfortable. Why is it
bad? Yeah, if they don't know it was bad, they're going to feel like, oh, well, nothing was wrong with that. Then if everybody's skirting around those issues and we teach these facts, like we once did this, we don't do it anymore, and we move on. They're not going to understand that it was devastating, that it was a horrible thing, and that people have been suffering generations from those actions. So that the point is almost like, yeah, they don't feel guilty, so it wasn't a big deal, because there are people who want them to feel it's okay to hate. That's where I come back to all the time. It's okay, whatever these issues are, whether it is, color or sex or whatever. It comes back to, we hated these people. This is how we treated them. And when we're telling you that this is what happened, you feel bad. But if you're being now told, don't feel bad, it wasn't, there's no guilt in what happened, you're going to make it seem like it was okay. And it's impossible for people to grow and learn if they don't kind of exist in a little bit of discomfort.
I think they're using the fact that the whole thing of being guilty, it's totally false, as we're saying. It has nothing to do, it has no place in the teaching of history or anything, but they're using that to say, well, we don't want our kids to feel guilty. We don't have to feel guilty. That's all that is. I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, and maybe this is for the whole next session that we have. I mean, because in my eyes, I'm going like, well, what do we do about it? Like, what are we going to do? It seems like we're just, like, even Johanna, it sounds like you're at this point in life, like just fighting against the bad, and where is the people that are, just being able to do the good, that everybody's just fighting against the bad. That's what worries me the most, because I'm thinking about when I was in my classroom, and I would say that probably, 75% of what came out of my mouth, I probably would be concerned about now. So, are there still teachers out there? I know you're saying in New York it's somewhat better, but it's coming to the point where everybody is worried about it. And when I was teaching, was always, what good can I do? How can I make it even better than it is? How can I take children and, teach them to care about everybody and not see differences? And, with little children, that's what you want to do. And it's so disturbing to think that we're just, fighting against a bad tide, and it's sitting heavy over my head.
Roxee, you're right. But here's the thing that we have to understand. They're pushing this agenda, creating these sound bites to put forth so that it gets traction across the country. Okay. And that people can start to say, oh, wait, because it started maybe with some people in Florida who felt bad about their families owning slaves. Right. And then it's like, but I feel bad about this now. And they jump on this. When you have conservative groups like the Heritage Foundation, right, who are working diligently to shape what is going on, not only in the schools, but also in our judiciary. This is a very big problem, okay? This is the problem. And like we have to look at what is happening, because it's insidious. It's insidious what's happening across the country in terms of judges being placed. And this is going to affect how these laws, get passed. And when it is brought before a court, what's going to happen, right? Because they're sitting there, they're in place, and we don't really understand all of that. But this is what they do. They create this line of thinking and talk that becomes, right, like when we said before, we talk about what the bill is actually called in Florida, and we're not going to say it because we don't want to, continue that conversation. We want to change the conversation, and that's what we have to focus on, changing the conversation and educating people. That's what we hope, what we're trying to do with this conversation, to get the word out so people can hear, what is going on, what is real, what is it? Make up your own mind. That's the whole point of educating our students, right, people?
Well, I think there's a lot of potential power in unions, in the teachers' unions. I really do, and I think that
they need to stand up.
The political,
right?
Politically, the people who are elected are going to have the final say in these things and what ends up in state curricula, whatever. And I think this is a time for teachers' unions to use the power they have to elect the right people, so that we can move away from these very, very negative paths that groups are trying to put us on.
I think it's important to understand that this is like a bipartisan hollowing out of our institutions, though. It's not just like, oh, these conservative AstroTurf groups, because those are like the vanguard of creating these laws to divest all of our public education. But there are plenty of rich liberals that want all their kids to go to charter schools. And there's a reason why a lot of the media is like, oh, it's the don't say gay bill. Well, what about all the other mental health stuff in there, right? And it's like, well, a lot of those liberals are a lot of corporate Democrats are tacitly okay with a lot of the stuff in that bill. And so it's important. Yeah, no, it is like the families on the ground that care. It's the teachers unions and stuff like that, people that aren't accountable to like textbook companies or different schools that feel like are couched in their own. They might address gay stuff, but then they never talk about a single class issue or any race issues or something like that. And so, I'll go around Cold Spring Harbor and I see plenty of it, right? Where I see one colored flag, and then like the entire community is like 90% white. And it's like, yeah, they're talking about redlining totally in the legacy after. No, they're not. And so, I think it's important to not try to think, oh, this politician or this political party has a set out agenda to like save our schools. It's like, no, it's your individual community and it's your local teachers union. And that's where a lot of the power does reside. It's with us. And it's only if we, band together and stop these, invading groups that seek to just defund all our public institutions.
Well, I think our largest nonprofit businesses is public education, right? So there are bottom lines to all of those things, and to be able to have these individual school districts be a reflection of the political ideologies that might exist in a given community. That is part of what it is that we're fighting as a union, as a collective. There are certain things that are not part of what it is that we do. Politics has no place in public education. Religion is not supposed to have any place in public education. But as you can see, these two institutions are making their way back into it, using critical race theory and anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all of those other things. So, masking what your true purpose is, and using, and I guess like we've been saying before, weaponizing all of the things that we don't want to mention because we don't want to give it any more traction. I think that's what becomes more of the concern. But we do have the power to speak up. The only problem is that not all public schools have the luxury of unions, as we were saying before. You have your areas in Florida. I don't know. South Carolina might be another one of those too. I think my aunt, she retired from South Carolina. So all of those places where it is that you are void of unions, that's one less advocate that it is that we have in trying to, try to fight what it is that's going on right now.
You know what I think another big problem is, and I might have mentioned this last time too, is that all these issues now are being used as wedge devices to split communities. So you can't, I don't want to say you can't, it's harder to organize people around the issues because we're so divided. And the one thing, Cindy, and you brought up this, like, what are we going to do? The problem is that I feel as though the organizations that are pushing these very hostile agendas are out organizing us right now. And I've said this in many forums. They're just doing a better job of getting their message out there. They're doing a better job of staying on message and organizing people who agree with them. And I even said this to union leaders. They're doing a better job of organizing than we're doing. And look, even in this Democratic race and for governor of New York State, the Republicans basically stay on message, but the Democrats don't. And I feel that they're even fighting each other. Like we have, I heard an advertisement from one of the candidates who wants to be governor of New York State, a Democrat, saying that he's going to do away with bail reform. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, are you a Republican or are you a Democrat? Whereas the Republicans would never do things like that, or the conservative agenda they don't infight as much as our end of the spectrum is infighting against certain issues. And I think that's going to be a big problem for combating. We have to all get on the same page and agree that, look, you might not be as passionate about diversity and inclusion as I am. Maybe you're concerned, but you know what? We agree on these various issues. So let's stick together. Let's do the good fight. But the other side is just doing so much better right now.
I think, Kerry, we're trying to organize and their goal is to disorganize.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing to us.
Chaos.
Keep doing that.
Chaos.
They're literally breaking us apart, breaking our united front apart with these little hot button things. And I'm so angry about masks, and I'm so angry about vaccinations, and I'm so angry about that they're disorganizing us. And that's the biggest part of it. That's the problem.
Democrats are playing fair. They're not too bright from where it is that I stand. I mean, when you have a group that is willing to, blindly follow one train of thought, regardless of it doesn't matter what anything says. It doesn't matter what the science says. It doesn't matter what the election results say, that you're willing to follow, without hesitation, while we're still here, or, some Democrats are still here waiting for this bipartisan, kumbaya that's really not going to happen. We can't even agree amongst ourselves. They've agreed to just say, you know what, we're going to follow this and we're going to ride it all the way to the end. We need to pick something, as organizations in the fight for all of the things that it is that we're talking about, and say, this is what it is that we're going to do, and we're going to do it together. Because the other group has no problem doing it, and they're being successful. Even if that populist minority, which is, it's kind of a large minority, they're the ones with the biggest voices. And what are we doing to combat that? We have to get on the same page.
Well, the Democratic Party is inclusionary, and the people we're fighting are exclusionary. It's easy to have one message when one message is what you're all about. There can't be any diversity of opinion. And that's why autocracy often defeats democracy. It's a struggle.
I think that what moves me about this conversation too is that ultimately we are a republic, and that we are based upon the concept of freedom to have discourse, freedom to discuss, freedom to allow for differing opinions, and then we come to some sort of consensus for the good of the whole. And we have lost sight of that. For all of this discussion we're having, we have lost sight of that. And of course, that is what we are concerned about as attentive teachers. We are all attentive teachers here. And we continue the conversation because it is imperative that we address this and that we get our message out to the nation, that this divisiveness is deadly for us as a nation. It is deadly for us as a nation. So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for being here to be part of this very brave, difficult, but important conversation, and hope that those who are listening will reach out to us at our website or at info@attentiveteaching.com. We are on Facebook and we are on Instagram, and you will see this Zoom in its entirety if you want to zoom in on some of the key ideas we've spoken about today. But we will be back with additional conversations that deal with this topic of CRT and individual rights and legislation that is hurting us as a republic. So I thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all of our guests. And we hope you join us again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, peace to everybody.
Guys, that was great. That was really, really great.
It was fantastic.
That was really amazing. Really great work that we just did. Johanna was amazing. You know, she was fabulous. Everybody was.
God.
I think we have a really good panel. Thank you, Rox, for bringing her.
Yes,
she was
Rox.
a wealth of information, and it's really, really good. Thank you guys for your time and for joining.
Yeah, I'm always available.
Thanks,
Thanks so much,
Have
everyone.
a great day. This was great. Thank you.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Where did Roxee go? I wanted to talk
Oh,
to her.
how good was this? This was unbelievable
This is
tonight.
so good. Oh my God.
It gets better every single week. This is what we wanted to do in terms of the talks.
Right. This is what we wanted to do. And we want people to, you know, we want our people to be listening and letting us know what they think. Okay. So I'm going to use, I want to use this little bit that we're talking about right here and put it up there. So I do want people who have listened into our podcast to get in touch with us and let us know if they want to be a part of it. Your voice is very, very important. That's what it's about. It's about real people discussing real topics in real time. That's what we've always talked about. Cindy, what do you think?
Oh, 100%. I mean, these are, as we said, important conversations and very brave of people to speak out and to talk about, you know, diversity and inclusion and free speech. Having a conversation today with an A.C.L.U member was very moving and important. That's what I could say. And we need people to get on board with us to bring this conversation to the forefront so that legislation cannot pass in remaining states or be removed from others that inhibits our ability to be free thinkers, That's what's on the line here.
Yeah.
Free thinking.
So we want to hear from you. So reach out to us, drop us a line, send us an email. We want to know what's going on, what you're thinking. Thank you.
Please do. Thank you so much.